Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Path of Exile 2 talk. Today I want to talk about my experience with the game and my overall views of it right now. I'm nicely into the endgame and I'm enjoying that later progression. But I think this is a fair point to basically say and cut to the chase. I think this is a really good showing of an early access release at that. This is one of the best ARPGs I've ever played easily. The amount of content, options and variety to it, this is insane. Compared to my experience with say D4's launch and the first few seasons even, this is a breath of fresh air to find a game with a relatively finished progression arc in its first version. But that's not to say that PoE 2, at least in this state, is perfect, and far from it to be honest. There are a lot of things that I'm going to talk about today that bring up issues or annoyance. There are quite a few, but the key difference here is that what I think are issues are things they could address relatively easy with mostly number tweaks, rebalancing, and little maybe even UI updates. Stuff they can address after feedback, and that is the point of an early access. So I'm overall very pleased, and I want to make that very clear before we get into these topics, where obviously I'll talk a lot about the issues I have to give that feedback. So let's begin. Right, so let's start with the story and acts 1 to 3 and as well as Cruel. I felt overall this was really good. I was playing a mercenary, so I had a bit of a slower start, but as soon as I hit say act 2, got access to gas grenade, things really changed for me. But there definitely was a slow opening. I have seen how melee also have really rough starts. And basically it made me wonder whether if you gave us, say, the tier 2 support gems sooner, would that make a big impact for these sort of slow starting classes? Mostly though, I think everyone's pretty happy with it. And I think the way they designed the maps to go through, really enjoyable. The optional bosses in particular, very impressive, very rewarding. Things I just wanted to do because they're all so unique and varied. The bosses in particular really stood out, especially the final boss of each act, with different phases and mechanics and really cool cinematic moments. I would describe pretty much all the mechanics as tough but fair, and that is exactly what you want in terms of difficulty, which felt fantastic during this section, generally nail on the head for me. Obviously, again, melee classes builds have a really hard time, a bit too hard of a time, and I think they need a buff. But yeah, I really enjoyed the story overall, and Acts 1 and 2 in particular. Act 3, I enjoyed the least out of all of them, and not because the story and context, the environment we're in was bad. In fact, it was one of the best, arguably the best section. But it felt like it went on way too long, and in general, the areas, the maps, they felt too bloated. Like, I don't know about you, but Act 3 was basically Backtrack City, running back to where you've been many times. Now, if you come to this later on, you'll experience that patch they put in where you can teleport from checkpoint to checkpoint, and that'll really help that stuff. But based on our really slow movement speed and lack of mobility options in the early game in general, backtracking feels terrible, and you do a lot of it, in Act 3 in particular. They told us that, they stopped working on the campaign for, say, Acts 4, 5, and 6 to work on the endgame, and that has worked out great for this early access version. I'm really happy they did. But I think it hit Act 3 as well, to the point where I'm thinking, was part of Act 3 meant to be Act 4? That would make a lot more sense, because it feels like it's like 3 times as long as the other 2 acts. This was highlighted when you get into Cruel, where say you're doing Act 1 and 2 again, it feels great. To Blast, now you understand your class, your gear, your setup, what you're meant to be doing, and in general the understanding, you get to really just smash your way through it. It's really satisfying. But then you hit Act 3 again in Cruel, and that's where the genuine slog comes in, and these areas, they just go on too long. So maybe I'm wrong, but it does feel like the current version of Act 3 is a bit unfinished, or maybe could do with some tightening up, or maybe even they'll cut a section out of it and put that into Act 4, which would make sense to me. But let's talk about the endgame, where I've been really sinking my teeth into this, and there's a lot of good I could talk about here, and also there's a lot of feedback I want to give. So the endgame generally is centered around mapping using the Atlas. As you likely know, you'll start in this center point and then work your way out by following these different paths. I really like how they've used these symbols to show, hey, what's over here and how we can stack them up. And if you didn't know, there's a little legend here to tell you what every symbol means and what you could possibly do there. Like, for example, unlocking your first hideout is pretty easy because it should be near you and you can pick that up. Hideouts are absolutely incredible. Like, different hubs during the story annoyed me for, say, the salvage bench being too far away or certain NPCs being out of the way. But in your own hideout, that's just not an issue, because if the map device is too far away, I can just move it closer, whatever feels right to me. So it's an absolute dream of convenience, and also the variety of them that you can actually get, at least initially, having 4 different options is pretty cool. In regards to the actual atlas, the way that we can get multiple on one setup is fantastic, and that's actually the meta around how I'm maximizing what I'm doing. Breaches, excavations, delirium, rituals, there's a nice variety of what you're doing, and then also the random bosses and corruption on other mods to enhance the challenge. This is a really rewarding loop. I also really like that you can unlock the towers and put in the tablets to change what's around. So every map that you haven't done that's nearby to it has that odds of being turned to a delirium if you want to spawn that at the tower. I like that the more difficult you make the maps, the more rewarding it becomes. And you have complete control over how hard you want to go on something like that. Taking a map and then changing its odds through the simple crafting system and what we've been doing with, our gear in general anyway. Like here we'll be affected by enfeeble, but we've got 33% increased experience gain. So I'd want to stay on this map as long as possible to maximize that extra XP. I find it very satisfying to set up a map that has a boss with loads of other events as well, and also use my highest tier waystone with as many mods that I can get on it, turning it to a rare and so on, and then just go to town. This results in being able to farm out incredible rewards on this specific map that we have basically intentionally set up for ourselves, increasing the challenge at the amount that we're willing to handle for much better rewards. And then you have the actual skill tree, allowing you to focus on the rewards that you want. Like I want way more waystone drops in general, and the quality of those drops too. That's what I've sort of started with. Since I'm really focused on delirium, I want to focus on these rewards as well. And I know that I want to focus on breach as well, since I find that very rewarding. And that's very intuitive. In general for the mapping, the amount of area variety, enemy variety, the layouts, the sizes, the enemy types themselves, and the ways to deal with it, my god, is it just very enjoyable. In a way that's very sustainable long term, because this is the endgame grind. I really thought it out. I also really like the fact that, by the time we hit endgame, we're going to have most of our ascend points. We're going to have most of our passive skill points, where we're just sort of filling in the little bit of last gaps with the remaining levels, allowing us to access most of our power as we're getting into that early endgame. So there's a lot of good to say about it, but now let's talk about some of the bad. For example, waystones are just not dropping enough. I'm using my skill tree for the Atlas to really enhance the drop rates and the rarities of them. But as I'm going into higher tiers, it's getting annoying to actually manage the waystones I have. Technically what you can do is have an infinite source of them. So if we come to Doriani, he always has the tier 1s. And you can buy, say, 9 of these, and then take them to the reforging bench. Then we can put them in and, rank it up. With that, suddenly I have 3 tier 2s. And then with those 3 tier 2s, I can make a tier 3. And so on, I can make a tier 4, tier 5. But this actually gets really, really expensive to the point where that is not something you can keep doing. What really matters is, farming lower tiers and hoping for drops. And so basically I would like to see lower level waystones be more common, or if we had more consistent access to tier stone tiers. What actually really matters to me is the random one-shots that I feel like probably if you tried mapping by now you've experienced. Being one-shot randomly feels terrible because obviously you lose the map on your first death, and they included that intentionally. It means that you have to really pay attention the entire time you're doing every single map run, especially a higher tier where you don't have as many of them to use. It does feel like you can never really chill out on map, which is, a nice bit of appeal for PoE normally. So I feel the difficulty spikes pretty damn hard when we hit this mapping endgame system. It's a lot of the rares with the RNG affixes, the volatile explosions near them, or even when they die, they just blow up, the AoE circles everywhere that sap you out of existence, and all this VFX and stuff that's going on. There's a lot of cloud effects, for example. It covers you, it covers the mobs, and it covers their attacks, so I can't even see if I'm standing in something, and then suddenly I'm dead and the map is just bricked. So obviously you have a hard time seeing what mods the rare even has before it's maybe too late. It's not clear enough in the visuals which is the big bad, what he's doing, and what you'll need to deal with and what to expect. It just kind of happens, and then you don't really get to react if it was a one-shot. So being able to work out which enemy is the actual dangerous one, and its mechanics for rares at least, I would like to see those changes. Overall, I think mapping in this state is really fun and a great start. But yeah, waystone drop rates, at least the lower level ones, definitely tweak that. I would like to see that. I do spend a lot of time traveling on maps, meaning, no mods, low tier waystones, just to farm waystone drops, which is not quite as fun. And I do think that the difficulty in general spikes a bit too much, too randomly. All of it, to be clear, requires a lot of focus. It means you have to pay attention or suddenly you might just be dead, which in a game about a long-term grind where we're doing this a lot, does have me concerned for a more casual player base. It's hard to relax and map. Now, Another aspect we should talk about are the trials, which they're overtuned, overly harsh, with really cool ideas and setups. It's been a bit of a meme that trials from Path of Exile 1, a labyrinth, people did not like that. They found the system really irritating or too invasive or whatever. And so when we heard in PoE 2 that we're going to get 2 trials and there'll be a third coming, we get to choose between them how we ascend. It means if there's a trial that you're better suited to because of your build or personal preference, you can just do that, get your points, farm that out, and ignore the ones you don't like or just don't work for your build. That is not the case, at least in this early access version, where we have Chaos and the Secumus trial. So Secumus, we have the honor system. If you're a slower build, a tankier build, this is a nightmare for you because you're not able to avoid the hits. Especially if you're playing a melee build where it seemingly, from what I've watched, looks absolutely miserable unless you've got a hyper strength build. Meanwhile, you have the Trial of Chaos where the modifiers are absolutely brutal, and of the 3 final bosses, 2 of them are a nightmare, especially the owl in particular. It's got really overtuned damage. It's interesting to see how what these negatives that you take in the Trial of Chaos, or say the bosses, it's just the numbers are too harsh. Things spawn too fast, you know, those AoE circles, too big, too often. When they're wanting us to do mechanics like, say, the escort, or, you know, going in and getting those soul cores, you're being drained while you're doing it, or you have to put the soul core down and you're trapped in an animation where you're still vulnerable to damage for some reason, and then there's a circle that spawns under you while you're stuck in this animation. It's just not fun. It doesn't make sense. So while the trials are meant to be hard, I do think they're overly harsh and definitely are a pain point for the community right now. We think that a lot of people are going to have a really hard time and get very frustrated getting their 3rd set of ascendancy points once they hit the end game. And we think that, you know, most people aren't even going to get their 4th ascend, which is not a good thing. Lastly, I want to talk about gearing and crafting, because obviously it was a bit of a pain point initially, but it's actually doing a lot better now. But is it perfect? I mean, definitely not. If we want to craft on something, you've got your resources and we have the limited options. This has 5 of our mods on it, and we can technically go for 6 with exalted orbs. And the problem on that is that exalted orbs are essentially too valuable. I have 27, and the thing is that I'm doing a lot of trading, so I'm getting exalted orbs, I think, more often than maybe a new or casual player. Now, something you can do through sort of crafting as a system is get yourself a 4th support, aka 5 link, sooner than normal. All you need to do is apply a Val orb to unpredictably corrupt something, such as your skill gem, and it might give it an extra socket, or it might actually reduce a socket. So, you know, do some low level gems and attempt this, and you might end up with one that has a 4th socket, giving you a power spike a lot sooner. But what we're waiting on for that is a greater jeweler's orb, and so exalted orbs could be the way to do that. The currency exchange exists for this purpose, so I want greater jeweler orb, and let's say I have exalted orb. It's kind of insane. You need 19, at least at the moment as I'm looking at this, 19 exalted orbs to get one of those. So it does feel like, you know, exalted orbs, you need a lot of them. Things are incredibly overpriced in terms of, say, the resistances you're going to find on the gear. To get 30% on 2 resistances, 60% total, you're going to be looking at, like, I don't know, 5 to 10 exalted orbs easily there. If you're looking for your chaos resistance, even more so. And then you're not actually getting these exalted orbs anywhere near as much as you might need them. So right now, I really like the crafting system. I just feel like we're a bit restricted or limited on the resources we have, even after that patch that honestly did really help to make some things that basically weren't dropping now start to drop. Trading with other players and, say, checking the NPC loot regularly, this is still a primary source of loot. Through all of my journey to endgame, 80% or more of my gear came from checking RNG spawns from NPCs, the traders, rather than drops or crafting, which, you know, still needs a bit of a push in my opinion. Trading is awesome though. Their system of having their own website instead of a third-party one means they're able to use these really cool interactions. I could press the button to direct message someone on the website, and then boom, it instantly messages them for me in-game. There's no messaging them back and forth. It's literally just invite to group, go to their hideout, make the trade, leave. It's so slick. So selling items is really cool too. Being able to list something in a special tab, the premium tab, for whatever amount that I want, and then have someone message me about it, and it even highlights which item that they're wanting for me when I open the stash. Really cool stuff. So trading is really well done. It's just a shame that NPC trading and player trading is like most of where my gear comes from. not crafting, and certainly not drops pretty much ever. So yeah, more changes there would be nice. And then in terms of the crafting, there's one thing I want to criticize, and it's the fact that when I put a rune into a gear, I can't take that rune out. They made it very clear that's intentional, and I think it's a bad choice, because basically all these items are now bricked. As I'm trying to manage my resistances desperately, I might find a new piece of gear that has, I don't know, 35% increased movement speed, so I really want to use that. But it's got different resistances on it. So now all of my setup is just jank as hell, because I can't take these runes out and change what resistances I have in my gear. Once I commit, I'm stuck, and it doesn't feel good, it's overly harsh. It's creating a massive pain point for resistances in general, where I think they've gone a bit too far. But yeah, let's cut to the conclusion. That's a lot of different topics, and I know that I've said a lot of like, here's my issue with that, or feedback with that. I just think it's easy to say, oh yeah, it feels great here, but here are my issues with it, and then talk about the issues. Most of it feels great, and ultimately, my feeling on PoE 2 is that it's very fun. I didn't know how much I would get into it towards the end game, but I'm enjoying it even more so than I expected. Most major problems that I have, and the feedback we've talked about today, are talking about number tweaks, not like a mechanical overhaul or say missing content that needs development time. It's just that there's a lot of stuff where there does need to be a lot of number tweaking. So it has a lot of potential, and it's down to GGG to respond to the feedback and address what's necessary. But yeah, it's all early access. It makes sense. This is my first kind of feedback video and review style thing. So I hope this covered a lot of the relevant topics for you. If you guys have anything you'd like to add to the topics, or your own opinion on it, let us know in the comments. For now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.